What's up, everybody, and welcome to The Flex. It's your boy Craig here for another week of fantasy football, and I have what I think might be a little bit of a treat for you not so fantasy football savvy watchers. Today I am going to describe the workings of fantasy football. I'm going to give you a breakdown of what it is to play fantasy football. That way, maybe if you didn't know that you might be interested, this might make you interested. If you don't know how to play, this will help you learn how to play. And if you've ever wanted to make your own league, this can help you as well. So the game of fantasy football, to me, is it's a lot of fun, but it also brings a group of friends together to play a 6-month game, talking trash back and forth. It brings forth some camaraderie, and it just makes watching football that much more exciting. I got into it about 6-7 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, and I've loved it every moment. Actually, I think it's been 8 years I've been playing fantasy football, and I've loved every year. So the first thing you have to do before playing fantasy football is determine the size of your league. You can start off in a rookie, amateur, low-rent, shameful league by playing with 6 players. Or you can go up to the pointless, nonsensical 14-team league. But the more popular leagues are going to be your 10 and your 12. So 6, 8, 10, 12, and 14. Anything more than that, and it's pretty much pointless. And I actually think anything above 12 is pointless, but there are 14 team leagues that are quite competitive. So like I said, anywhere from 6 to 14. If you're playing, I would only recommend playing in a 6 or 8 team league if you just want to play a season to learn the game. It's very good. My ex-girlfriend, when I had her play, I had her start out with an 8-team league. So give everybody who never played before an opportunity to have a well-rounded team with a deep waiver wire. And I'll explain what a waiver wire is as we move forward. So once you've decided the 6 to 14 players you will have in your league, the next step is to determine a buy-in. Are you playing for free? Is it a $10 or a $20 buy-in where it's a winner-take-all? Or is it a $50 to $100 buy-in where anywhere from first, second, and third place get money? So I'll just speak from an easy way to do it is a $50 buy-in, where at the end with a 10-team league, now you're looking at $500, and a lot of people will do a 3-way payout where first place will get $300, second place $150, third place gets their money back. It's a very fair way to do it. $50 isn't a ton of money. If you do happen to do, say, a $20 or a $10 buy-in where the prize is anywhere from $100 to $200, in those instances, I usually say winner take all. That way, it becomes more competitive, and with such a small payout, nobody wants to get $50. So I'd recommend anything less than $300. Go with a straight winner takes all. So now you've determined your buy-in, $50, and now it's time to figure out your draft order, the order in which people are going to pick their team. So for those of you who don't understand the way a draft works, so just like in the NFL, slightly different, but just like in the NFL, NFL has 1 to 32, and a draft, if you're playing in a 10-team league, it's 1 to 10. So you will go pick your first round would pick from 1 to 10, and then your second round would go 10 to 1. So it's like a snake. Everybody gets a fair amount of picks, so that way if you were first in the first round, you're last in the second. And there's lots of fun and or boring ways to determine draft orders. You could pick numbers out of a hat. There's a card game where you can play where you deal out cards 1 through 10 and take them back, and then you flip the cards one at a time, and the order in which your card gets flipped is the pick that you get. There's also other, you can be competitive with it. One year we did a wing eating competition, and the order in which you finished your wings was the order in which you got to pick. Now in my league we do something a little bit different than that. So most people, you pick your order and that's where you land. You get your order and that's where you land. And in my league we don't do it that way. You get your pick, but that means you get first pick on where you want to draft. So you can get number 1 and decide you want to pick 10. You can get number 5 and end up being able to pick 3rd. It really is just however you want to set it up. But once you get your draft order, now you're ready to decide how you're going to draft. So there are 4 ways to draft. My least favorite way of drafting is what's called auto draft, where you allow the computer to pick your team. Now, if you've never played fantasy football before, this is a great tool to utilize. It almost guarantees that everybody has an equal team because the computer picks the best available player for each position in each round. It also makes sure that you get a quality pick in the round. It might pick a quarterback when the quarterback isn't the best available pick because you need a quarterback. But the auto draft is really for novice players only. You should not be, unless you're trying to do some sort of you're trying to randomize it so that people don't mess up the draft. I don't recommend it unless you've never played fantasy football before because it definitely kind of takes the fun out of it. And to me personally, the second best part of fantasy football is drafting. It stinks that you only get to do it once per season unless you play in multiple teams like me. But to me, it's the most fun. Everybody's together and you're making your picks. People make mistakes, you get to laugh at them and whatnot. I don't know. The draft is just fun to me, so I don't like to do auto drafts. My second least favorite draft formation is what's called the auction draft. And the auction draft is cool, but it leaves a lot of room for error, and it also leaves a lot of room for people to take advantage. So basically, it is what it sounds like. As you go through the rounds, players come up, and then so they'll say Le'Veon Bell starts at arguably $10, and then everybody bids and bids and bids until one person's left standing. Now the problem with that is sometimes people get overzealous and they pay too much for a player. Then other times you get players that a player that nobody wanted that's really good, and then someone gets them really cheap. I don't know. Auction drafting is very complicated. There's a salary cap that you can't go over, and if you do not know what you're doing, it's an easy way to ruin the whole season for yourself. So I do not recommend those. Now, the 2 draft formations that I do recommend, the first one being online drafting. That is just like it sounds. Everybody logs in at the same time, and when the clock counts down to 0, the draft begins. You have 2 minutes on the clock, 1 minute on the clock, depending on what you decide as a commissioner. You do get to choose those settings. I believe 1 minute is the max time you should get. 2 minutes drags out a draft longer than it should go. And then you pick your picks. My problem with this is everything's on the computer. It's all right there. It gives you the top picks, blah, blah, blah. Now, even though live drafting, we all use the cheat app or a cheat sheet. I don't know. I like the idea of everybody being in the same room together and having the fun of the draft. But if you can't do that, this is the second best way to draft. It's straightforward, and you still need to know what's going on in football to make the right picks. And then finally, my favorite way to draft, which is called the live draft, where you can go to Hooters or Buffalo Wild Wings or in your backyard or anywhere where you can bring a draft board, and you have a big board, and it has slots for up to 16 teams, and then up to, 30 players. And so basically, everybody puts their names across the top in their draft order, and as you pick, you take a sticker and you put it in the spot and where your in the appropriate slots, and you do your draft. Takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on how good people are at drafting. And it's fun, you know, you get to play games, you get to talk smack, you get to try to throw people off. It's a fun way to draft. It's the best way to draft, and in my opinion, it's the only way to draft. So after you have selected your draft type, now it's time for the rounds of the draft. And this is the fun part, you know, selecting your players, just making sure you're checking out for players with bye weeks. Because here's the thing. If you pick one quarterback, I've actually done, for a person who knows fantasy football, I've made this mistake twice in my life where I've drafted a quarterback and then I drafted a second quarterback, and those quarterbacks have the same bye week. And if you're not familiar with football, a bye week is the week that any particular team does not play. Every team gets one bye week per year. So if you have Tom Brady and then you have Matthew Stafford and they both have a bye week of 11, then guess what? You don't have a quarterback come bye week 11, and you better hope someone's willing to trade you a quarterback for a quarterback or whatever the case may be so that you have a quarterback during that time frame. Then you have your settings. So now this is probably something you're going to do pre-draft, but you can do it after the draft if you're doing a live draft. So what it is you're going to set up your point system. You're going to select the type of league you're going to play in. Are you going to play in a standard league, or are you going to play in what I like to call PPR? I don't really call it that. Everybody calls it that. But PPR, in my personal opinion, is the only way to play. And if you don't know what PPR stands for, that means points per reception. So every time a receiver, running back, or tight end catches a pass, they get 1 point. And then you get to decide how many points thereafter. Usually wide receivers get 1 point for every 25 yards. Running backs get 1 point for every 10 yards. Quarterbacks also get 1 point for every 25. Some leagues will do for wide receivers and tight ends 1 point for every 10. Gives you a little bit more of a point advantage. I do like to play that way. I like to rack up the points. So 1 point for every 10 yards for wide receivers, or 25 if you don't want to give wide receivers a boost. Then you also have points for defense, determining like how many points get deducted for average points scored during the game. You also get to decide what roster positions are going to have. You get to decide your playoffs. Now, there's two different types of playoffs in fantasy football. So let me start off. You have the regular season, but it's different from regular football. The regular season is from week 1 to week 14. And there's 17 weeks of football. So from week 1 to week 14, you have regular season. Then in what I would call a good league, your playoffs are week 15 and 16. And the top 4 teams make it. So top 4 play each other in week 15, and then the winners of those 2 games play each other in week 16, and the winner of that gets the pot. Now, some people prefer to have a 6-team playoff. And the way that works out is you go week 15, 16, and 17. Now, people think that's cool because 6 people get to be in the playoffs. But what you don't realize is if you have, say, for argument's sake, you have, let me go with somebody who would make it, Todd Gurley. Let's say you have Todd Gurley. It's week 17, and the Rams have not only clinched the playoffs, they've clinched the first round bye. They're the number 1 team. They might not play Todd Gurley week 17, and now your number 1 running back is out. Everybody plays up to week 16, but that last game, sometimes your top player doesn't play. It doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes they don't play. So you definitely want to keep it to week 16 by having a 4-person playoff and then doing that in weeks 15 and 16. So now you've set up your playoffs, you got your matchups, you've decided whether it's going to be won by points or if it's going to be won by record. Now what that means is, do you want the top 4 people to be the people who scored the most points or the people with the most victories? I always say go with the people with the most victories because you could have people who had really big weeks, say they had 5 big weeks, but the rest of them weren't as big. They've scored the most points, but they don't have the most wins. I feel like that can be unfair to everybody else, so I go by matchups. Whoever the win-loss record is how you make it to the playoffs, and that's my preference. And then when you have ties, the points are what breaks the tie. So if you have two guys going for that fourth place position and one player has 1,600 and the other player has 1,585, the guy with 1,600 makes it to the playoffs. So now, after that, after we've drafted, now you have to decide in the league what the roster is going to be. And by that I mean week to week, you get to play anywhere from 9 to 10 players. So there are certain formats you can have. So most teams have about 15 to 16 players on their roster. But like I said, you only get to play about 9 of those guys. So you can do quarterback, 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, a tight end, a flex position, a kicker, and a defense. That is probably one of the most basic ways to do it. Another way to play it is a quarterback with 3 wide receivers, 1 running back, a tight end, no flex, a kicker, and a defense. Then you can do, now this is a little bit more rare. If you want a high point scoring league, you're probably going to need 16 to 18 bench, but you can do a 2 quarterback, 2 wide receiver, 2 running back, tight end, flex, kicker, defense. And then finally, the way I like to play gives you a deep roster, 16 players. I do a quarterback, 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, a tight end and a flex, a kicker and a defense. Just giving you a huge team to play. The bench, it won't be as big because of this, but it's a fun way to play. You have a lot of players going at one time, and it just works out really well. So, and then you have your bench with the remaining of the players that you picked throughout the draft. And then you also have what is called the waiver wire. And the waiver wire is basically the rest of the players. Because, for argument's sake, you're in a 10-team league, 16 players. That's 160 players. Well, guess what? There's a lot more players than that in the NFL. And the rest of those guys are sitting in the waiver wire waiting for you to pick them up. So there's a couple options in the waiver wire. I think I have chosen the best form of the waiver wire, but also the least used version of the waiver wire. In my leagues, I turn off waiver priorities and I turn off the waiver wire altogether. So if you want a player and you pick them up, you get them instantly. Now, some leagues, they have 2 options on. One is how many days a player is on the waiver wire once he's been dropped off of a team. So it could be 5 to 7 days that you have to wait to pick him up. You might need that player, and now he's not available for 5 to 7 days. Nobody wants to deal with that. I want a player when I want him. But some leagues do that. You can have it a 5-day, 3-day, 2-day, 1 day, all the way up to, I don't know, maybe 7. And that player cannot be picked up by anybody. Then they also have what's called waiver priority. And the way waiver priority works is the person with the worst record has the number 1 priority, and the person with the best record has the lowest priority. Now, that also varies at week to week. Sometimes it adjusts itself to give everybody a fair chance at that number 1 position. Sometimes it's random, I think. But if you're the first person to realize that, I'm trying to think of a player, say Marshawn Lynch is the starting running back for Oakland, and he signs. They got Isaiah Crowell. Isaiah Crowell's on the waiver wire. You have Marshawn Lynch. Marshawn Lynch goes down, and you know it because you're watching. No one else is paying attention. You go to pick up Isaiah Crowell, but you're number 5 on the waiver priority. Guess what? It doesn't matter that you were paying attention. It doesn't matter that nobody else is watching the game, and it doesn't matter that nobody else knows that Marshawn Lynch got injured. You are not going to get Isaiah Crowell. Somebody else is going to get him. So there you are, twiddling your thumbs, hoping and praying that you're going to get Crowell, and you know damn well that you ain't going to get him. So I turn off all that crap. You want a player, you pick him up, he's on your team. It's the best way to play, and it also makes the cream rise to the top. The people who are paying attention, the people who are there to win money, getting the players that become available when they become available. If you want to win, you should be knowing what's going on. You should have the apps on your phone with the alerts. You should be watching the games on Sundays, Thursdays, and Mondays. You should just be paying attention to what's going on. And if you're not, then you're going to lose out. Plain and simple. The only problem with what I do is you're going to have people in your league who I like to call waiver whores. And waiver whores are the guys who can't make up their mind, so they add drop. And then after doing 10 add drops, they end up picking up the player that they dropped originally. It's stupid, it's annoying, but it doesn't actually affect you. So it's all good. So now, like I told you, you have your regular season matchups from week 1 to 14, and then you have your playoff matchups from 15 to 16 if you're doing it the right way, and if you're doing it the dumb way, you got from week 15 to 17. And then in weeks 15 to 16, you have a 14 playoff, and in weeks 15 to 17, it's a 16 playoff. And then, like I told you, you can either go by record or by score. So now you have, the trade situation. So you're playing against, somebody, and, you need a win this week, but, you lost your lead running back, or your lead running back's on a bye week, and the guys you had, you didn't play it out smart, and you're missing a running back on your roster, but you have a wide receiver who's doing well that you don't really utilize as much because your wide receiver core is stacked. So you are allowed to trade with other players. Now, they do have different options for trades. So with trading, there has to be some oversight. Someone or someones who say whether or not a trade is viable. In my league, I am the be-all, end-all. I am the ruler, the dictator of the whole situation. So therefore, hypothetically, you got AJ Green on your team, but you don't need him because you stacked up on wide receivers, and AJ Green is playing well, but not as good as your other two wide receivers. And you want to maybe get some value for him and make a trade so you have a running back to replace whichever running back is on your bye week. We'll say Nick Chubb. So you go to, Joe Schmo and say, hey, Joe Schmo, I have AJ Green. You've got 4 running backs on your squad. I would like to take one of them off your hands. So I will give you AJ Green for, let's say, Kenyon Drake. I don't know if that would be a fair trade or not, but let's just say, for argument's sake, Kenyon Drake's doing good. And you want to trade him. So you select Kenyon Drake, and then it brings you back to your team, and you select AJ Green, and you send the trade. Now what happens is that person gets an opportunity to accept or deny. If he declines, it's done and over with, and you can make another trade offer, maybe offer him 2 players for 1, 3 players for 1, whatever the case may be. It depends on how desperate or how needy you are or how great the player you're trying to get is. Then, if the trade goes through, if he accepts it, now, in my league, I said I'm the dictator. Every trade goes through me. I get the opportunity to say, yes, this is fair and it can go through. No, this is disgusting and I will never let this happen. I say 95% of the time in my league, I let trades go through because, if you make a dumb trade, that's on you. But if you make a trade that looks like it's unfair, I say no. If you make a trade that looks like you're trying to cheat, I'm going to say no. And if you make a trade that makes absolutely no logical sense and boosts somebody up, I'm not going to let that happen. Now, you also have what is more of a democracy where you can allow everybody a vote. Now, that's cool because it kind of makes it fair. Everybody decides whether or not it works. But people have to play you. And if they think your team's going to be stronger via this trade, they might just say no. So it all comes out in the wash. I prefer that the commissioner, meaning the person who runs the league, makes the decisions. As long as he is a fair commissioner like myself, then that works out. If not, then you never know. So And then the last thing I always like to tell people about is the option to add the injured reserve slot into your roster. And what that means is if you have a really good player that's going to be out for 5 weeks and you don't want to lose a roster slot holding on to him, but you know if you drop him, somebody else will waste the roster slot on him, it's good to have what's called the injury reserve slot, where you can put an injured player for the duration of his injury. Once his injury is over, you do have to drop a player to put him back and be forced to put him back in your roster, but it is a good way to maintain a player that's injured for a time period of however long his injury lasts. It also works for suspended players as well. So that's pretty much how fantasy football works. You play each other week to week. You set your 9-player roster. You go up against each other from Thursday to Monday, and the winner wins, the loser loses, and whoever has the most wins out of 14 weeks goes to the playoffs, and whoever doesn't lose in the playoffs gets the money. I hope if you don't play fantasy football and you're watching, I've inspired you to play. I hope if you play fantasy football that maybe I've given you some insight into some stuff you may not have known. But that's how the game works. Quick little tidbit of information offensively. TJ Yeldon got signed to the Buffalo Bills, which I think was a smart move by the Bills, giving LaShawn McCoy a decent backup and potentially someone who could step in if he gets hurt. And Chris Hogan went to the Panthers. I like that move for Chris Hogan. I think that he could be utilized by Cam Newton really well there. So that's all I have for you on this week's show. My name is Craig. Check out my show, The Flex, Wednesday nights at 9. Check out my new show, The End Zone, with my homeboy AC, Thursday nights at 9. We'll also be on YouTube. I'm going to be dropping the link. I'm going to be posting it on Facebook, so you'll get to watch. But check us out. The show is going to be live. It's going to be big things. So I look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, have a good night.